The Jade Palace in Manhattan wasn't just another restaurant, it was the crown jewel of the city's dining scene. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, scattering light across velvet drapes and polished marble floors. Every night, the restaurant was alive with the quiet murmur of elite conversations, CEOs closing deals, politicians whispering strategy, billionaires flashing their power with every raised glass. But on this particular evening, the atmosphere carried a sharper edge, a tension woven beneath the golden glow. At the head of the most prestigious table sat Li Wei, a Chinese billionaire whose empire stretched across continents. She was draped in silk, her fingers glittering with diamonds, her every movement calculated to remind those around her that she was wealth itself. Around her, 5 American businessmen leaned in eagerly, laughing louder than necessary, agreeing too quickly, each desperate to stay in her good graces. To them, pleasing Li Wei wasn't just courtesy, it was strategy, the difference between securing millions or losing everything. And then there was David, the waiter. To the casual eye, he was invisible, just another man in a crisp black vest and white shirt, carrying silver trays of wine and carefully balanced plates. But to Li Wei, he wasn't invisible. He was a target. Every time he approached the table, her lips curled into a sneer. Switching to Mandarin, she muttered loud enough for her guests to hear, "Look at that monkey serving us. He probably doesn't even know how to use chopsticks." The words dripped with venom, wrapped in the safety of a language she assumed he couldn't understand. The American businessman chuckled nervously, not comprehending the words but sensing the cruelty in her tone. They laughed because she laughed, because power demanded it. And as the evening carried on, the laughter grew sharper, uglier, bouncing off the crystal walls of the Jade Palace like broken glass. David stood there silently, holding his tray steady, his face calm. But behind his stillness was a storm no one could see, a storm waiting for its moment to strike. To most people in the Jade Palace that night, David Thompson was nothing more than a background figure, another nameless waiter gliding silently between tables, tray in hand, shoulders slightly hunched, blending into the rhythm of service. But the truth was far more complex, almost unbelievable. Beneath the crisp uniform and quiet demeanor was a man who had once walked the corridors of power, shaking hands with diplomats, lecturing before foreign ministers, and negotiating trade agreements that shaped the fate of nations. Years ago, David had been a rising star in Washington. Dr. David Thompson, a Harvard-educated scholar and cultural attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. He wasn't just fluent in Mandarin, he spoke it with the grace and rhythm of a native, even switching effortlessly into Cantonese and other regional dialects that left even seasoned Chinese officials astonished. His mastery of the language wasn't just academic, it was lived. He had spent years immersed in China's culture, studying its poetry, its history, its political intricacies, until he became one of the few Americans truly respected by both nations. But life has a cruel way of testing even the strongest. A jealous colleague, threatened by David's brilliance, framed him for espionage. Accused of betraying his own country, he endured endless interrogations, invasive investigations, and sleepless nights. Though the charges were eventually dropped and his innocence proven, the damage was irreversible. His reputation, carefully built over decades, lay in ruins. Doors that once opened effortlessly now slammed shut in his face. Colleagues who once praised him now whispered behind his back. In the end, David was forced out, stripped of his titles, abandoned by the very system he had served so faithfully. And so, the man who once stood at the heart of diplomacy now stood carrying trays of wine to tables where the rich mocked him. To the businessmen at Li Wei's table, he was just a server. To Li Wei herself, he was entertainment, someone to degrade for sport. But what no one in that glittering dining room realized was that David was not powerless. He was not ignorant. He was not broken. Every insult that fell from Li Wei's lips, every cruel laugh that echoed across the table, he understood perfectly. He wasn't just hearing the words, he was memorizing them, holding them like a blade that he would one day turn back against her. In silence, David carried not just trays of food but the weight of his past, the brilliance of what he had achieved, the injustice of what he had lost, and the quiet strength of a man who knew that even the most powerful can fall. To everyone else, he was a waiter. But in truth, he was a storm disguised in stillness, waiting for the exact moment when silence would transform into fire. As the evening stretched on, the atmosphere around the millionaire's table grew heavier with arrogance, like smoke filling a room with no escape. Liwi, draped in her flowing silk gown, had moved past subtle mockery and now indulged in open cruelty, as if each insult was another jewel added to her crown. With every glass of wine she sipped, her voice grew louder, her laughter sharper, slicing through the polite hush of the Jade Palace. She leaned back in her chair, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier's light, and spoke in Mandarin with deliberate venom. Imagine living like him, cleaning tables, serving food. He's no better than the dirt on my shoes. The American businessmen surrounding her exchanged uneasy glances, not understanding the words but sensing the poison in her tone. Yet still, they laughed along, desperate to stay within her orbit of power, each laugh another brick in the wall of cruelty being built around David. Liwi thrived in this theater of humiliation. She had built her empire not just on money, but on dominance, on making others small so she could appear larger. To her, every glance, every word, every gesture was a performance designed to remind the world of her superiority. She wielded humiliation like a weapon, cutting people down with the casual ease of someone who had never been told no. In her mind, status was everything, and anyone beneath her was not just irrelevant but expendable. David, standing silently at her table with his tray balanced steady in his hands, was the perfect victim, powerless, voiceless, disposable. And yet, there was something unsettling in the way he endured it. Most men would have flushed with anger, stammered in protest, or at least let their eyes betray the sting of the words. But David did none of that. His face remained calm, his eyes steady, his silence unshakable. To Liwi, this composure was amusing. She mistook it for weakness, for submission. She smirked and leaned forward, lowering her voice as if sharing a private joke with her guests. Look at him. He doesn't even understand me. Like a dog obeying commands. Her words dripped with disdain, but what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that David understood every syllable. He understood her insults not just linguistically, but culturally, each phrase layered with centuries of elitist contempt that he had studied, lived through, and now absorbed with chilling precision. Thomas leaned forward, his deep voice breaking the silence. I saw everything. The words hung heavy in the air. Diana's knees weakened, and she clutched Jasmine's hand tightly, bracing herself for the storm she was certain was coming. But Thomas's next words were not what she expected. I saw what your daughter did, he continued, his gaze fixed on Jasmine. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, carried something unusual this time, something softer, almost reverent. She could have taken that money. She could have hidden it. She could have lied. But she didn't. Jasmine blinked, tilting her head innocently. Because it wasn't mine, she said simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Thomas's chest tightened. For a man who had seen boardrooms filled with liars, contracts signed with hidden traps, and friends who turned into thieves, the simplicity of that statement felt like a lightning strike. Because it wasn't mine. 6 words that carried more weight than all the speeches, excuses, and apologies he had ever heard. Diana, still shaken, whispered, Sir, she's just a child. Please don't hold this against her. She meant no harm. Thomas rose slowly from his chair, his towering frame casting a shadow across the room. But instead of anger, his face carried an expression Diana had never seen before, something between awe and relief. For the first time in years, Thomas Mitchell wasn't looking at people with suspicion. He was looking at them with hope. Diana held Jasmine close, her heart racing with fear. She was certain that at any moment, Thomas would call security, accuse her of theft, and end the fragile life she had worked so hard to build. But instead of anger, Thomas's words carried a strange calm. He revealed that the open safe wasn't a mistake at all, it was a deliberate test. For months, he had lost faith in people after being betrayed by those closest to him. So he created this cruel experiment, leaving temptation in plain sight, waiting to see if honesty still existed in the world. Diana's knees weakened when she heard this. The thought that her little girl had been unknowingly caught in such a dangerous trial filled her with dread. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Thomas lifted a hand and silenced her. His piercing eyes were no longer fixed on her, they were on Jasmine. The little girl, with her pink gloves and innocent smile, had done what countless adults had failed to do, she had passed the test without hesitation. For a long moment, Thomas simply stared at her, his heart heavy with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Betrayal had made him bitter, suspicion had made him cold, but Jasmine's act of simple honesty had pierced through all of that. She hadn't seen wealth. She hadn't seen an opportunity to steal. She had only seen the truth that the money wasn't hers and acted accordingly. In her innocence, she had unknowingly given Thomas the very thing he thought was lost forever: faith in humanity. Thomas rose to his feet, his tall frame casting a shadow over the room. He walked slowly to the safe, pulled out a thick bundle of cash, and returned to where Jasmine stood. Bending down to her level, he placed the money carefully in her small hands. Diana gasped, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Sir, no, we cannot accept this." But Thomas only shook his head. His voice was softer now, touched with a sincerity rarely heard from him. "This is not a reward for greed. It is a gift for honesty. Tonight, your daughter reminded me that integrity still exists in this world. And that lesson is worth more to me than any fortune I've ever made." Diana's tears spilled freely. She tried again to refuse, but Thomas cut her off gently. "You've given me back something I thought I had lost forever. Because of your daughter, I believe again. From this day forward, you will never have to worry about your job or your future here. You both have earned my trust." Diana fell to her knees, overwhelmed with gratitude, clutching Jasmine in her arms. The little girl, too young to fully understand the weight of what had happened, smiled innocently as she held the bundle of cash. To her, it was not money or power, it was simply proof that her honesty had made her mother proud. And for the first time in years, Thomas Mitchell felt the heavy armor around his heart begin to break. In that quiet office, surrounded by wealth that had once meant everything to him, he realized that the greatest treasure in the world was not money, it was integrity, pure and unshakable, found in the heart of a child. That night, Thomas Mitchell's office became more than a place of business, it became a place of transformation. For years, the billionaire had believed that honesty was dead, that greed had consumed every corner of humanity. But in the simple act of a 6-year-old child refusing to take what wasn't hers, he found a truth more powerful than all the riches locked inside his vault. Diana walked away with more than just financial security that night. She walked away with dignity restored, her faith reaffirmed that goodness is always noticed, even when the world seems blind. Jasmine, too innocent to fully understand the weight of her actions, carried in her tiny hands not only money but the proof that honesty can move mountains even in the heart of a man who had given up on people. And Thomas, the man who once set traps expecting betrayal, left that night humbled. He discovered that real wealth isn't measured by the cash in your safe or the numbers in your bank account, it's measured by the values you live by, the principles you hold onto, and the way you treat others when no one is watching. The lesson is clear: honesty has no price tag. It cannot be bought, and it cannot be faked. It lives in the choices we make every single day, whether we take what isn't ours, whether we treat people with fairness, whether we choose integrity even when temptation is strong. In the end, justice always finds its way. Greed may win for a moment, but truth stands forever. Diana and Jasmine didn't just pass a test that night, they reminded us all that integrity is the one treasure no thief can steal, no money can replace, and no time can erase. For a long moment, no one moved. The Jade Palace, usually alive with chatter, clinking glasses, and soft music, was frozen in stunned silence. Even the waiters in the background had stopped mid-step, their trays suspended in the air. All eyes were on David and Liwi. The billionaire, once so commanding, now sat in her high-backed velvet chair like a queen whose crown had been stripped away in front of her court. Her face flushed crimson, a mixture of rage, humiliation, and something far more dangerous: fear. She slammed her wineglass down, shattering it against the crystal tabletop. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice shaking. "You think you can stand here and humiliate me? You're nothing but a servant in my world." Her fury was volcanic, but there was a desperation underneath it, as though she knew her power was slipping through her fingers and she was clawing to hold on to it. But David didn't flinch. His posture remained steady, his eyes unyielding, his calmness in stark contrast to her unraveling rage. He stepped closer, his words carrying the weight of justice itself. "You humiliated yourself tonight, Liwi. Every insult you hurled, every laugh you demanded, every cruelty you performed, it was never about me. It was about you. Your wealth, your arrogance, your belief that power is permanent. His voice grew louder, not with anger, but with truth that could no longer be silenced. But power without humanity is fragile. And tonight, everyone here has seen just how fragile you really are. Gasps echoed across the room. The American businessmen, who had laughed alongside her all evening, now exchanged uneasy glances. They had aligned themselves with her cruelty, and now they could feel the weight of guilt pressing on their shoulders. One of them shifted uncomfortably in his seat, finally realizing that in their eagerness to please her, they had exposed their own cowardice. The diners at nearby tables whispered to one another, some with disapproval, others with awe at the scene unfolding before them. Liwi's lips trembled, her attempt at a smirk faltering into something rawer, panic. She reached for her handbag as though clutching at her wealth would restore her control. You'll regret this," she stammered, her voice cracking. "Do you know who I am? Do you know the power I hold?" But her words no longer commanded respect. They sounded hollow, stripped of authority, echoes of a queen whose throne had already crumbled. David leaned forward, his voice dropping low, calm yet thunderous in its impact. "Yes, I know exactly who you are. And so does everyone else now. You're not untouchable. You're not feared. You're exposed. And the world doesn't bow to arrogance forever, it remembers, it whispers, and it judges." His final words were delivered not just to her, but to everyone watching, a truth that pierced the air like lightning. And then, something remarkable happened. A slow clap began at one of the corner tables, hesitant at first, then stronger. Another diner joined in, then another. Within moments, the entire restaurant was applauding. Not for wealth. Not for cruelty. But for the man who had stood tall against it. The applause swelled, echoing beneath the chandeliers, rising like a wave of justice crashing against the walls of the Jade Palace. Liwi sat frozen, her face pale now, her authority shattered. The businessmen lowered their eyes, ashamed of their earlier laughter. And David? He didn't bask in the applause, nor did he gloat. He simply bowed his head slightly, acknowledging the moment not as a victory for himself, but as a truth revealed for everyone to see. His calm dignity stood in stark contrast to her crumbling pride. That night, the Jade Palace witnessed something greater than fine dining and wealth. It witnessed the fall of arrogance and the rise of dignity. And while Liwi would be remembered for her cruelty, David would forever be remembered for his courage, the man who turned silence into justice and reminded the world that respect cannot be bought, only earned. As the night drew to an end, the echoes of applause lingered in the Jade Palace like a haunting reminder of what had just transpired. The guests slowly returned to their meals, but their eyes still followed David with a new kind of respect, the respect that comes not from wealth or titles, but from dignity and truth. Liwi, on the other hand, left the restaurant in silence, her pride shattered and her arrogance exposed. For someone who had built her reputation on fear and power, the sting of humiliation was deeper than any wound. She walked out, but she carried the weight of that night forever, a night when her empire of pride collapsed under the weight of her own cruelty. David, however, did not linger in triumph. He quietly resumed his duties, as though the applause and revelation had not been for him personally, but for the greater truth he represented. His humility was as striking as his courage. To him, standing up against arrogance wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, about reminding the world that humanity should always come before pride. And in that silence, in his calm return to service, he became more powerful than any billionaire seated at those tables. The story of that evening spread far beyond the Jade Palace. Those who witnessed it retold it with awe, whispering of the servant who had silenced a millionaire, of the man who revealed that character is worth more than wealth, and of the truth that arrogance always falls in the face of dignity. The American businessmen, once complicit in laughter, were forced to confront their own weakness. And the diners, who had watched in stillness, carried home with them an unforgettable lesson: respect is not a luxury to be granted, it is a basic right that every human being deserves. This story reminds us all of something timeless: power and wealth can build walls, but they cannot shield arrogance forever. Cruelty may reign for a night, but truth and justice echo for generations. David's strength was not in money, status, or authority, it was in his courage to remain calm, to wait for the right moment, and to speak the truth when silence could no longer hold it. His victory was not just his own, it belonged to everyone who has ever been looked down upon, mocked, or belittled for being less. In the end, the Jade Palace did not just witness a confrontation. It witnessed a revelation. A reminder that dignity is stronger than pride, that respect is more powerful than wealth, and that the human spirit, when tested, always has the power to rise. And so, the story ends, not with wealth, not with power, but with truth. Tonight, we saw how arrogance crumbles and how dignity rises when tested. David's courage reminds us that no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, your worth cannot be measured by money or status, it's measured by the respect you show and the truth you carry. If this story touched you, let it be more than just entertainment. Let it be a reminder: treat every soul with kindness, for one day, your actions will define how the world remembers you. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that reveal the hidden truths of humanity. Because in the end, justice always finds its voice. And respect is the one crown no one can ever take away.